Thank you everyone for listening to that announcement. I'm going to give everyone a chance and opportunity now, including if you want to listen in English, to find that global button that we mentioned and to select it and to click English. You're going to want to make sure you click that even for any of the language you're interested in. And I do want to make sure everyone knows that today's EVV public stakeholder meeting is scheduled for about an hour and a half. If you're disconnected from the webinar, please click on the original email invitation that you received to re-enter today's webinar. And please know that we have time scheduled at the end of this presentation for a comments and feedback session. At that time, you'll be able to raise your digital hand. We'll be able to call on you. We'll give you the ability to unmute yourself. Right now, you're not able to unmute yourself, but we'll give you that ability. We'll call out your name. You'll be able to ask your question, though we will want to make sure to give everyone a chance. So the more people we get to, the better, we say. And for anyone that's interested, you can turn on closed captioning. We do have that enabled. You're going to want to click on the closed caption button. If you do not see it, click on the 3 buttons, also known as more, and you'll be able to select that and click on captions. And you'll be able to decide if you want to view the closed captioning or a transcript. At that time, without further ado, I want to make sure to pass the torch off to our presenter today and let Leora take it over. Hi, Leora.
Thank you, Donald. My name is Leora Felicina. I am the Deputy Director of the Adult Programs Division. We oversee IHSS. Before we get started, I wanted to hand it off to Claire Ramsey, our Chief Deputy, for a few opening remarks, and then we'll get started with the presentation. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Leora. Welcome everyone to our IHSS EVV stakeholder meeting, and Happy New Year. I'm Claire Ramsey. I'm one of the Chief Deputy Directors here at the Department over Disability, Adults, and Housing Integration. I just wanted to take a minute before we kick off the content to thank everyone for being on this call and for everyone who has participated over the last few years in our stakeholder conversations around electronic visit verification. We've been working all this time to make sure we are finding a workable, compliant solution. So as we continue to move forward over the next few months, we continue to appreciate your feedback and your partnership. And we want to make sure that you know that this is just the first of our sessions that we're going to have to make sure that we have a chance to get feedback. Leora will talk more specifically about what else we're doing, but we are going to be doing focus groups, having opportunities for written comments if people choose to participate that way or prefer to, as well as another stakeholder meeting later this year. So lots of opportunities. This is just the first, but we're really appreciative of everything you've already brought to this discussion over the last few years and look forward to continuing to work with you in partnership. Thanks, and I'll turn it to you, Leora.
Thank you, Claire. So Donald, you can go ahead. Thank you. So pretty much this is going to be a very brief presentation. We're going to just talk about kind of where we've been for those who are new and aren't aware of all the things that we've done already. We're going to talk about the upcoming changes, some information about proposed solutions. We're going to talk about next steps, and then we're going to definitely have lots of time for your comments and feedback. So go ahead, go to the next slide. So just for a little bit of background, we're really here about EVV, which came to us as a federal mandate in the 21st Century Cures Act that required all Medicaid personal care services, home health services, that it requires us to track and have providers check in and out. We worked closely with stakeholders at the beginning of this process after the 21st Century Cures Act was passed. We came up with what we thought was a very good solution that was embraced by our stakeholders, and we completed that implementation on December 31st, 2020. Unfortunately, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid system, CMS, provided additional guidance that essentially told us that our solution was not in compliance, and we were required to collect geolocation of providers at the beginning and the end of each work shift, which for those who use the EVV system now, you know, you manually enter in your start time and end time. You enter your location, you choose your location, and then your hours worked. This requires us to make a little bit of a change. We've been working with CMS for quite a while, and we've been paying penalties since January of 2021. And at this time, we have to move forward with implementation to become in compliance with federal law. And through lots of discussion, and it's been decided that the implementation date will be July 1st of 2023 for all counties. So the prior implementation of EVV was rolled out across the state in a phased rollout by county. These changes will be rolled out all together on July 1st. So all providers who are required to use EVV will be using them at the same time. You can go to the next slide. So I do want to make sure that I emphasize who really is going to be impacted by this change. It really only impacts non-live-in providers who are filling out these fields on their timesheets today. So as I just mentioned, providers are manually entering this data into the electronic services portal or the telephone timesheet system today. This is actually going to automate that data collection. And I also want to make sure that everybody's aware that live-in providers are not impacted by this change. So back when CMS provided guidance, they at that time also told us that live-in providers were not required to use EVV. So we have already implemented that change. So this pretty much is what's going to change. Beginning July 1st of 2023, the new requirement will be that providers must check in and out at the beginning and ending of each of their shifts in real time. So it's very similar to what providers are doing today, where you're manually entering that information. And providers will now be required to check in at the beginning and check out. Geolocation will only be electronically confirmed at the time of check-in or check-out, and only if the provider identifies themselves as being in the recipient's home. So for providers who start their day outside of the recipient's home, doing performing services like shopping and errands, those kinds of things, they would mark themselves as in the community, and the system would not capture their location at that point. Go to the next slide. I also wanted to make sure that we identified what stays the same. This does not impact recipients. So the way recipients review timesheets, the data as it's presented to recipients will not change. If recipients using the electronic services portal or the telephone timesheet system, none of that changes. All of that process remains the same. Providers will electronically submit their timesheets in the same way they do today. So they either will use electronic services portal or the telephone timesheet system. Nothing changes there. And providers will still be able to tell us if they live with a recipient at the beginning of each pay period, as they do today. And if they identify themselves as being a live-in at the beginning of the pay period, they do not have to check in and out and complete the EVV fields. And yet again, live-in providers are not required to use EVV, so they will not be required to check in and out at all. So to comply with the federal requirement, we're looking at several solutions. We're trying to be as flexible for providers as possible. So we're looking at how we can capture geolocation in real time. And there's 3 real ways of doing that. And we'll be developing a mobile application, which will be available similar like to other apps that people use on their phones, like Facebook, their email, those kinds of things. We are modifying the electronic services portal for individuals to be able to check in and out using the existing systems. So if you use a computer in the recipient's home, a tablet, those kinds of things, you're already using electronic services portal, the website itself will be modified to do check-in and out. And providers will also be able to use a landline phone located at the recipient's home. So if the recipient has a landline telephone, provider will be able to when they start their day, check in through that landline phone and check out through that phone. The idea is also that a provider can use multiple solutions, any one of these interchangeably. So if they're in the recipient's home, they checked in through a landline telephone, but they end their day in the community, and they can use the mobile application or the electronic services portal to check out at the end of the day and identify themselves in the community. And at that point, their location would not be captured. It is important to note that all solutions will automatically complete the provider's timesheet and make the submitting of that timesheet far easier. So right now, where providers enter this data, the system will automatically capture that information as people check in and out. Providers who use direct deposit will continue to be paid faster. And there are no penalties for making an error. So as a provider, you can fix your entry all the way up until the time that you submit your timesheet to the recipient for approval. So if you forgot to check in or you forgot to check out, all of those entries can be fixed at any time prior to submitting the timesheet. So we really wanted to focus on making this as easy as possible for people to use. So all solutions, mobile application, ESP, TTS, will continue to be easy to use. And it will allow for providers to check in and out in real time, enter their daily hours they work for each recipient they work for, and auto-populate the provider's timesheet. So all of the fields that providers are currently manually entering, any one of these solutions will actually automate the data entry for those. And like I said before, if you have to fix something, you can definitely fix that on the timesheet without any problem. The solution will identify location, whether it's at the recipient's home or the community. This is very similar to what we do today, where a provider actually identifies if they're in the home or the community for each day they work. This will automate that. We will not capture geolocation when the provider identifies themselves in the community. So that's been guidance from CMS. Nothing changes there. We only capture location only at the time of check-in or out if the provider identifies themselves as being in the recipient's home. Providers will still be able to review their timesheets and correct errors. And providers can use a device of their choice. So just like today, they can use any one of the solutions interchangeably. They're comfortable on the telephone. They can continue to use that. If they want to use the mobile app, which is what we're hoping will be very easy for providers to use, they can use that. It will really be up to them. I do want to make sure that everybody understands no solution is tracking a provider's location. It is only capturing location electronically at the time of check-in or check-out when a provider identifies themselves as being in the recipient's home. So I do want to make sure I emphasize that there is no tracking of provider's location. If providers help multiple recipients, they would do as they would do normally, as they would data enter, but in this case, they would check in at the beginning of their day and check out at the end of the day for each recipient that they work for. And then they would be able to enter those hours that they worked as they do today. So I think it's also important to point out some of the supporting activities that we'll be doing to help providers and to train providers. We are updating provider training materials and translations. For those of you who were with us during the original EVV implementation, we had a lot of materials out there for providers, step-by-step guides, videos, those types of things. We will be updating those as well as creating new ones for the mobile application. We will be doing webinar trainings like we did last time, where I believe we had 8 a week or so, between 6 and 8 a week. We will be scheduling those as well for providers to come so we can train people how to use it. And we also are going to make sure that our IHSS service desk agents are able to assist providers. Today, they assist providers with their technical problems, device issues, those kinds of things, and also answer questions. They will also be able to do this. Assist providers for this as well. You can go to the next slide. So I want to make sure for everybody's aware of our next steps. So we will be sending out some initial outreach notices to impacted providers probably more towards the end of this month. We'll be doing another public stakeholder update similar to this meeting in March of 2023. We are planning provider focus groups at this point, working with counties to get at least 4, one for each region, so we can walk out the solutions and talk with providers and show them the prototypes so that they can give us feedback to make it more easy to use. We will be doing provider trainings March through June. So we'll be sending announcements and all of that, and then the statewide implementation is planned for July 1st of 2023. So that was a very quick, I hope, and painless presentation. So now we'll go ahead and open it up to comments and feedback. And go ahead, Donald. I know that you can help facilitate some of this.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Leora. Again, for anyone that would like to ask a question either out loud or via message, please go ahead and raise your hand at this time, and we'll go ahead and call on you to give you the ability to unmute yourself. We did have a few early questions, Leora, to kind of get this ball rolling, maybe get some people thinking about it. And one came from Marissa, who asked, can a computer be used to check in and check out?
Yes, it can, if it's located in the recipient's home. For sure, if you're identifying yourself as being in a recipient's home, then you would check in there using their computer. But if you were out in the community, you would have to use a different type of device at that point. Great. But yes, a computer is a tablet, cell phone, smartphone. All of those are able to be used.
Great. And one more before we get to the hands is, will the TTS only be available for landline and not cell phones? If people only have cell phones, is there a workaround for this issue if people do not want to have geo tracking?
So the requirement to get tracked, to have the actual location captured, is it has to be a landline telephone. So cell phones do not meet the mandate, and the landline would have to be located in the recipient's home. So if you're located there, so that's how the landline would work for those individuals.
Right, and now we'll go ahead and go to those hands. I see a few up, and the first will be Lorna Schrader. And first I'm going to apologize to you, Lorna, and everyone else to follow if I mispronounce your name. But we are giving you the ability to unmute yourself. So please go ahead and unmute, and the floor will be yours.
Thank you very much. And you pronounced it correctly. I'm wondering about those of us that do emergency care. So I go to a recipient's house. I've been called that morning. They need emergency treatment. I maybe see them 2-3 times in total. But what if they're not going to show up? I don't have the paperwork yet. It's not in the system yet. They're not going to show up under my name, and I'm not going to show up under theirs. How do I check in, check out when they don't even show on the system with me yet? Do you understand my question?
Sure. So I think what you're asking about is really about retroactive eligibility, right? So when you have a new provider and they actually haven't completed provider enrollment, right, and they're hooked to your case, and then we pay them retroactively, we would not in that case be capturing location. So what would happen is that they would fill out the timesheet like they do today, where they would manually enter that information in by the day for those retroactive periods, and then moving forward, they would use the EVV to check in and out in real time. Does that answer the question?
Thank you, Leora. And I
Oh,
went ahead.
Leora? I'm
Yes.
sorry, this is Claire. I just want to say, I also heard within that question a little bit about what might happen in a backup situation. If somebody is only working for someone on a very short-term basis and the system doesn't catch up immediately with the provider being linked to the
No.
recipient.
So a backup provider is actually hooked to the case prior to them being sent out. So in that case, they would be doing check-in and out using EVV, and they should be able to, because in order for us to pay the differential, we would have to know that they were there. So in those cases, the county should be hooking that backup provider to the case prior to them being sent to the recipient's home in that case. So they would be using EVV. If they didn't, then we would obviously allow them to enter, just like with any time before, they would enter their start time, end time, and the hours that they worked. So I just wanted to, I received a question in directly to me. So I wanted to make sure I read the question. So it says, exactly how will the changes impact IHSS advanced pay recipients who already track their own provider hours? Whose clock are they supposed to go by if we do not check access to the clock to capture check-in or check-out? You're making the IHSS and WPCS program more difficult. Recipients often have to help providers. So in the case of advanced pay, so you're actually only paying them for the hours that they work. So the check-in and the check-out time may be different than the hours that they worked. So if the advanced pay provider is already attached to your case, they would use the EVV system to check in and out and enter their date, their time that they worked for you. And the advanced pay recipient would pay them like they do today for the time that they worked. Then just like today, when you receive the timesheet, you would validate the entries in the timesheet to make sure that the hours that they worked were what you paid. And that's how it would work. So very similar to today. So you have advanced pay providers today. They're not a live-in, is my assumption. In that case, then we would, then you would pay them for the hours that they worked, and they would check in and out. If they're not attached to your case, then they would do that at the end when they submit their timesheet, just like they do today.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one. I see quite people sending messages to chat. Let's go ahead and try use the hand feature at this point. I want to make sure we don't miss anything. There's so many questions coming in. I want to make sure, we might be able to answer it as well. So the next person, David Alcas, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll try to be quick. I have just a couple quick questions. The first question is, does it matter whose device you're using for the mobile app? For example, like, does it have to be the provider's cell phone, or could it just be like an iPad that happens to exist in the household?
Yeah, either one of those will work. So the way both the mobile app and the electronic services portal is that you enter in through your individual account.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where you would be checking in and checking out from. So you would access your account, pick the recipient that you're working for, and then select check in or out, and then where you're at, right? So if you're in the recipient's home, you would select it there. If you were out in the community, you would select that and click the button.
Okay, great. So the device itself doesn't really matter whose device you're using, as long as you use your own login information.
That's 100% correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then really fast, sorry, I know the second question was I just wanted to run by a hypothetical example to make sure I'm understanding. If, let's say, the provider arrives at the recipient's home, they check in, and then as the geolocation is captured since it's in the home, and then let's say they need to run an errand for the recipient that's in the community, and that was like the end of their day or the end of their shift.
Mhm.
When they check out on the device, let's say using the mobile app, because they're checking out outside of the home and they select community, the geolocation will not be captured.
That is correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all I need to know. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Great. Well, thank you, Leora. And that takes us to Samuel Jane. You should be able to unmute yourself of DRC, Samuel Jane.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Leora and Claire, for this presentation. I just have a question about the federal statute or regulation stating that EVV will not be used against providers if they're not in compliance. There was some discussion about that, and I was just wondering if you know the citation of that statute or regulation.
I don't, but we can definitely get that for you. Thank you for raising that. So I do want to make sure that we point out that there are no penalties associated to EVV. So we want to make it to where, the requirement is that folks have to use it, and that's really where we're headed. We want people to check in and out. We want to be in compliance with the federal statute, but there's also state law that protects providers. So we have no intention of penalizing providers for making errors if they forget to check in or out or anything like that. But we can definitely look for that citation for you, Samuel, as far as that goes. The federal mandate does not include that, but the state statute does.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Great. Well, Karen Ulvani, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I had a question about providers who work overnight shifts and who are not live-in providers. And in the earlier implementation that didn't go forward, there was going to be a requirement for such providers to wake up at midnight, log out, and log back in again. And I wanted to know what the current implementation looks like.
Yeah, so unfortunately, because that shift crosses two different time periods, they would have to check. So you would be checking in and checking out. If for some reason the individual, missed the checkout time, they would be able to go back in and adjust that. But they definitely need to put what hours that they worked by the day, right? Because Thursday is from midnight to, 12 to 12. That's Thursday, and Friday is from 12:01 to 11:59. The next are, so we want to make sure that each day that they work is considered, the hours that they work is considered two different shifts with regards to how IHSS providers are paid.
Yeah, but the federal statute itself says the beginning of the shift and the end of the shift with no requirement for a pay period considerations. So there's, you're conflating the payroll with EVV in this implementation.
So the actual federal statute says that that providers are supposed to check in and out when for each service. And we are interpreting the statute that IHSS services as all of the services provided under the IHSS umbrella are considered services for this purpose. So a work day for IHSS, the work week is Sunday through Saturday. Each day is its own day. And that's how hours are claimed today, right? So if your provider is entering their time, they're entering most likely the start time up to midnight, and then they're entering the hours they work for that day. And then they're doing the same thing for the next day. So they're entering, 12:01 to whatever their end time is, and then they're entering the hours worked there. So in that case, that would be the same way that this works, but we can definitely take a look. I know we were looking at some ways of automating some of that. And so maybe this is a candidate for something that we can take a look at to see if we can make it easier. So thank you for bringing that up.
Please do automate it. The only individuals who require overnight care are the most disabled individuals at the highest needs. And if they're, not being served by family, this is a tremendous hardship for their staff.
Sure, no, I appreciate that feedback, and we'll definitely, I definitely took it down, and we'll make sure we go back and take a look. And this is also something that we can hopefully get some provider feedback and recipient feedback during the focus groups that we're going to be having in the next month or so. So thank you so much for providing that feedback to us.
Hey, well, thank you, Leora. And we now have Craig Yates. Craig, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Good morning. How are you? I mean, good afternoon, actually. Pardon me. Sorry. My question is, why are live-ins not required to use EVV?
So live-ins are not required to do EVV because that's the guidance that we got from the federal government. So this is a federal mandate. It's not something that it was passed through state law. So because IHSS is a federally funded program, we have to actually implement. And their guidance was to that live-in providers did not have to do EVV. And it was actually a little bit of a benefit for a lot of our providers, since about 71% of our providers are actually family members that live in, a little bit less than that, who live in the home with the recipient. So that's pretty much why that role is what it is.
Thank you very much.
And before we go to the next hand, do we have any questions in chat, Donald? Are you seeing anything?
Questions are coming in, but at this point, if we get to their name, we're going to go ahead and have people raise their hands. We want to make sure that everyone gets addressed first. And if someone would like to ask a question via chat, please still raise your hand. We'll call on you. If you would not like to ask it out loud, we can then read it at that point.
Sure.
I just don't want to miss anything. And that takes us to Claudia Clayton. Claudia, the floor is yours.
Hi, my question is related to errors and penalties. So let's say a provider forgets to check out after they're done with their shift, and then they forget to do their check-in and check-out throughout the pay period, and they decide to correct their timesheet at the end of the pay period while they're sitting at home. Their location would be, and they're using the app, their location would be captured as their home. Would that be okay? And also, if they do this as a habit, would that also be okay?
So providers can correct their entries at any time. We don't capture location for any time entry that's not real time. So we would only capture their location if they were checking in and they marked that they were in the home. If they missed a check-in or they missed a check-out, we anticipate that that's going to happen, especially as people are learning to use the system. They can always go in and fix those times, and there is no penalty for that. And there's no plans for any penalties.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you, Claudia. And that takes us to Margaret. Margaret's iPad. Unique name there. Margaret, floor is yours.
Yeah, I was wondering how you would know my name. Oh, this electronic stuff. All right, back to the beginning here. I'm curious about how much the penalty was you had to pay the federal government, and was there consideration of, since California already developed a system and implemented it, why did you have to pay penalties, and why is there a change, and did you consider a legal challenge? Because this is not a rule, this is an interpretation of the law and under guidance. So I wonder if you could talk about those things.
Sure. So when we originally went out and did our stakeholder work based on what the original guidance was that we received from the federal government, and this is the 21st Century Cures Act, which is a mandate and a law. We interpreted it a certain way, and we worked with our stakeholders to come up with a solution that really worked for people, which was we used our existing timesheet system. We had people manually enter start time, end time, location, and the hours that they worked. What ended up happening is that the system itself needs to be certified by the federal government in order for us to get our federal funding. And so if the system is not in compliance, then through that 21st Century Cures Act, we had to pay penalties. So the federal government deemed that our system was not in compliance because we were not capturing geolocation in real time. And as a result, we had to start paying penalties in January of 2021 to the tune of many, many millions of dollars. I'm trying to find the amount. And so essentially what happens is at the beginning, the first year, the penalties were smaller, and then they get gradually larger every year that you're not in compliance. So that's kind of how we ended up paying for penalties, and that's why we're required to pay them. Until the federal government certifies our solution and our system, we will be required to continue to pay penalties. So our goal is to have the system implemented by July 1. On July 1, we can complete the certification process and no longer have to pay penalties after that point. So I'm hoping I answered that question. I'm looking for the amount, but I'm not sure. I don't want to give the wrong amount. So if somebody on my team is on the line, they can definitely try to find that amount. And if not, we'll definitely send that out as part of the materials. And we'll add a frequently asked question to the list that included that amount.
You know, Leora, thank you by me helping with this. I'm not going to be looking it up right now, so that's great. But I do want to ask the question I've seen a few times. I should be able to answer, and I have it. Is the slide deck, this wonderful slide deck that you and your team put together? Is it going to be housed anywhere that we can send or?
Yes, it will be. So all of this presentation plus the transcript and the recording of this meeting will be added to the CDSS website. This presentation in and of itself needs to be made accessible before we can send it out, but we will definitely get all of that done as quickly as we possibly can so that we can make sure people have this information for sure. We're also in the process of updating materials on the website. Now that we've had this meeting, we're getting some feedback. We can actually add some questions to the frequently asked questions documents, and we'll be updating all of that and putting that all out on the website for folks to access. And we'll be sending emails to the distribution list to make sure people are aware when those materials will be posted.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, that now takes us to Sheila Gunn. Freshman, the floor is yours. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I would have thumbs upped Marg's comments. I agree with them. I have two questions. The first is when and how and by whom is accessibility of the mobile app going to be tested? Accessibility under the ADA and 504 of the Rehab Act. There are IHSS workers who are legally or totally blind, and there are IHSS workers who have print disabilities. I want to be sure that complete access is available. I also would like to see user experience testing done and usability studies as well as accessibility studies, because we know that the law says you have to do thus and such, but you may do thus and such, but it may not make any sense. And so you want to make sure it's truly usable, because if it's accessible but not usable, then it's not really accessible either. That's number one. And number two is, are you, oh shoot, it went out of my head. If you answer that first one, maybe this one will come back.
Sure. Sure. So we have already, so as part of the electronic services portal implementation, we have actually been have a continuous effort to do all of the accessibility certifications that we need with regards to ADA. So those activities have already happened on the recipient side, and I believe they are almost complete on the provider side, so that the mobile app, not the mobile app, but the electronic services portal itself should be accessible.
I'm worried about the mobile app because I know that there are going to be workers who use it who may need screen readers or large font. And I remembered my second question, but go on.
No, sure. And definitely that we are required by law to ensure that those are accessible. And so we will make sure that that mobile application is accessible for sure.
I want to make sure that the community is part of that effort, because I've seen things that are labeled as accessible that aren't. And my second question is, I'm going to call somebody out, and I'm sorry in advance. Connie Arnold wrote an open letter asking for reasonable accommodations, and I don't know what became of that letter on the state side, but I am interested in what she had to say. And I would have liked to have seen this slide deck before this meeting. I did not write a reasonable accommodation request, but that is something that in the future I would like to see happen, that with, maybe 24 hours before the meeting or 48 hours before the meeting, we get to see the materials so that we can come prepared. And that's it. Thanks.
No, sure. Thank you, Sheila, for the feedback. I really appreciate it.
Okay, that takes us to AUSOL or AGU ASL. The floor is yours. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Is that for Lisa Aguas?
I think so.
That's probably you. Yeah.
Okay.
Hello.
Good. Hello. So my question is, I did have a call this morning from a provider, and evidently the check-in and check-out option was on the portal, and this was the first time that she was seeing it. So are they having to check in and out as of now, or is this going to be happening in July?
No, it's happening in July. So
Okay.
there was an error with our vendor they accidentally displayed that there's no functionality behind it. There's nothing for it to do because we have not gone out and done our focus groups. So they did do a layout for us for a screenshot, but it didn't get pushed. What happens is that people who have older browsers, sometimes they keep the history and it displayed only temporarily. So individuals who saw that, when they log back in, they should not see it again. And if they do, I would definitely have them report that to us as it's a defect.
Okay, yeah, because I didn't recall receiving any information regarding this new requirement, so I wasn't sure if this is something we needed to know, so we're prepared to let our providers know. And then just to kind of the other question regarding the TTS, that it has to be a landline. So what happens if the client doesn't have a landline? Are they able to use their cell phones?
So not to capture location. So they'd have to use one of the other solutions to capture location.
Can you repeat those solutions again? I'm sorry.
Sure. So there's going to be a mobile application that somebody can have on their smartphone, very similar to like your email or your, Facebook, Twitter, something like that. Or they can use the actual electronic services portal that they're using today, which is the website.
Okay.
So they can access that through a device or whatnot, or a landline telephone. Unfortunately, the cell phones don't capture the location accurately, and they don't meet the federal mandate.
Okay. Alrighty. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to remind those to raise your hand. You're going to want to look for the reaction button. And there on after you click on the reaction, you'll be able to click on raise hand. Daniel Aldretti, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. My question goes back to the provider emergency backup system. With the EVV check-ins and the requirements through those, is it, you had mentioned that those providers should be linked to the recipients beforehand. Is the 426A not required for those backup providers in those emergent situations to
So
link them?
I do not believe a 426A is required for a backup provider, but we'll definitely take a look at that. Because you can't have, oftentimes your recipient is requesting backup services because their provider is not there and they need somebody immediately. There's no way for them to really do a 426A at that point. It's really about the county really getting a backup provider to that recipient's home to provide those emergency services. So I do not believe a 426A would be required in that case.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, that's going to take us to our first person from a phone number, 1760, last 3 digits 545. The system will ask you to unmute yourself. And how do you do that? I don't know. Hopefully it tells you. There we go. Hi.
Good afternoon. My name is Christine Loomis. I'm with the California In-Home Supportive Services Consumer Alliance. I'm in Riverside County. And my question is about for a provider that may work both IHSS and WPCS hours for the same client in the same home. How would they go about doing check-in and check-out if they are not a live-in provider?
So they would have to check in for that same recipient twice, because it's just like today, Christine, where they have to fill out 2 separate timesheets. It's the same way for EVV. That is some good feedback though for us, though. Maybe we can take it back and look at how that check-in and check-out option works for people. And maybe we can automate some of that, where if you're checking in for WPCS and IHSS for the same person, maybe we can figure out a way of making that happen so they only have to do it once. But that's some definite feedback we'll take back.
Well, would they have to check out at separate times? Like say a person came to the home and they worked for 6 hours, and say 4 of those hours were for WPCS and 2 of them were for IHSS. Would they have to make that separation within their check-in, check-out, or would they put them together and check in, say, at 12 p.m. and out at 6 p.m.?
Yeah, so they would check out at the end of their shift, and that's where, and right now it would be, they would do it for both WPCS and IHSS. And when they check out, the system will actually ask them how many hours they work. So we're not tracking, you know, just like today with check-in and when people put in their start time and end time, we're not really tracking that information. So in the case where they started their shift like at 6 a.m. and they ended it at 5 p.m. and 4 of the hours was IHSS and 5 of the hours, and I know my math is probably wrong, is WPCS. They would at that point put how many hours they worked. So they would enter for the IHSS, they put 5 hours. And then for the WPCS, they would put the number of hours they worked for WPCS for that day.
Okay, but those would both be separate then. So
yes,
you've answered my question. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Leora. Well, that takes us to Debbie. Debbie, you should be able to unmute yourself.
I have what's called UMA. That's a service that uses a residential VoIP. Is that considered a landline? Is it, or is that considered the cell phone, alternative?
You know what? We will have to take that one back because I'm not sure.
Because I know other people are using this. There's another, like I said, the service I use is UMA. There's another one called something Jack that I think people took on. We did when residential costs for landlines was starting to go up so much. We still have a residential landline, but if the DSL goes down, then it goes down also. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there to you.
No, thank you so much for that great question. I'm not sure, so we'll definitely have to check that one out. Thank you.
And then the other question that the previous caller had, I'm kind of interested. I wasn't clear on the exactly understanding of it, but the easier you can make it for our providers, the better, because I have a daughter that does have IHSS and she has WPCS, and it's not always clear, when Sally Joe comes in that, which program, which bucket is she going to be using the hours from on that particular day. It's not always clear at that moment which one she's going to be using it, but this person's working for both programs. So it would be helpful if you guys streamline this as much as possible so the two systems were able to talk to each other, so they're not having to check in and check out, 2 different times, even though they're using 2 different programs.
Sure. Thank you very much for that feedback.
Okay,
Definitely.
thank you. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and go to Alex next. Alex, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Oh, yes. Hi, this is Alex. I am a professional poet because I actually have a book on Amazon that came out during the pandemic. So since I write a lot about social justice and I'm a self-advocate, let me just share this on my role called the Social Impact Platform. And if you Google me, Alex Andy Fong, ALEXANDYPH, you will see my author bio online because I'm a Google item. So yay me. The Social Impact Platform. Writing communication, poetic verse, shifting thoughts, writing ideas down before anyone forgot. The burning of the Library of Alexandria did have tragic qualities. Nevertheless, the will and to go above and beyond allows for knowledge acquisition, and utilizing the mind can remind people of the beauty of the sublime.
Sir?
Yes?
Sir, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Did you have a question about electronic visit verification?
Oh no, I put in the chat that I wanted to share a poem because I'm just attending for the fun of it. That's all. Sorry. Okay, never mind.
I'm sorry. I really appreciate the poetry, but we have a lot of folks that are trying to get their comments in. And no, thank you very much for sharing.
Right. Well, that takes us to Ruth Grogan. Yeah, we are kind of pressed for time. Thank you, Alex. So, Ruth.
Hi. My question is, when I go to her house and she makes out a grocery list, and then I have to go shopping and then I bring it back, how's that going to work? As far as.
So if somebody's checking in,
yeah.
So they check in at the beginning of their shift. So wherever they're at when they start their shift is where they would identify their location. So if they're starting in the recipient's home, they would select home and they would check in. So then all of this stuff that they do during the day, all of the services that they provide, that kind of stuff, they would not have to check in or anything until the end of their shift. And then wherever they're at. So if they go to the pharmacy and they pick up something for the recipient and they're out in the community when they end their shift, then at that point they would check out in the community. If they ended their shift in the recipient's home, then they would check that in the home and then they would click check out. So it's wherever they're at the end of that shift.
Oh, cool. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, that takes us back to Margaret. The floor is yours.
Hi again. Let's see. One of my questions wasn't really addressed, which was that it seems unfair. We got penalized. I'm not sure when the certification process came in. California had developed a really simple, functional way to do this, and the Cures Act does not say geolocation anywhere, so it is interpretive. Was there a consideration of challenging this interpretation legally?
So we have been working with our sister department, Department of Healthcare Services, to work with CMS on the requirement. Their guidance and their interpretation in this instance is what matters. We have tried to find alternative ways of doing this that did not include capturing geolocation. We've done a lot of work in that space, and unfortunately, the federal government, CMS, has come back and said that our solution is not compliant. So if you go out and look on the 21st Century Secures Act, a lot of these requirements, including certification information, is out there, and we have to follow that certification process in order for us to no longer have to pay penalties. So this isn't something that the state, it's not a state law, it's really a federal mandate, and we're required to follow their process. And so that's really what we're doing at this point.
So I guess the answer was no, you didn't challenge their interpretation. CMS. I understand that it's a federal law. I've read the law. It doesn't say geolocation. It is a little vague. There was no rule making to make mandatory certain interpretations. So it seems to me there's room for pushback. I'm wondering again if you did some pushback with CMS.
Margaret, this is Claire Ramsey again. I just want to say we did have numerous conversations with CMS along with our sister department, DHCS, and this is where we landed in terms of solutions that would be approved and that would allow us to come into full compliance, to get certified, and to stop paying penalties. And that, so that's how we've landed where we are right now.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, that takes us to Carly Kavina of Napa County IHSS. The floor is yours.
Yeah, hi there. Thank you very much. I just have a couple questions to make sure I've got what you guys are saying correct. I'm wondering if CDSS has any data around how providers currently use the electronic services portal in this way, meaning that I've assisted a lot of providers and recipients over the years in learning telephonic timesheet system and ESP, and majority of them do not enter their time at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day. It's more of like a recon at the end of the week or at the end of the pay period. So there'll be an expectation for counties to be teaching existing and newly enrolled providers to be doing this, or can they keep using the systems the way they do now?
So providers are going to be required to check in and check out at the end of every shift. That is the requirement for the federal mandate for EVV. So counties, just like today, so counties answer those types of questions. If somebody contacted you at the county and asked you what the requirement was, I would anticipate you guys would provide them and advise them what the requirement is. As far as training, CDSS will be holding lots of webinar trainings, webcasts. We're going to have information online for providers to help them through this process. We recognize that it is kind of changing the way they do things. A lot of providers wait till the end of the pay period to enter their time, and this is changing that. So they will have to check in and check out at the end of each day that they work.
But if they do, and they go in at the end of their time at a later well, in their pay penalties or anything like that.
Yeah, there's no penalties.
Okay. And one more question. You had said that the electronic check-in and check-out can pre-populate a timesheet. Is that correct?
That will be correct, yes.
Okay, and so sometimes providers sort of have a mixed day where they provide 2 hours here, then they, you know, go have lunch or something, do something else, a private errand, and come back. So if they check out at the end of their day, let's say they check in at 8, they handle some personal errands, and they eventually check out at 8 p.m., but they really only want to claim 4 hours that day. Will they be able to update their timesheet if it captures like more time than what they actually worked?
So it doesn't capture time like that. So what will happen is somebody will check in at the beginning of their shift and they check out at the end of their shift. And then the system asks them how many hours that they worked. So at that point, if they worked, if they checked in at 8 and checked out at 8, but they only worked 5 hours, they would then note that at that point that they only worked 5 hours. We're not looking at the check-in and check-out times or comparing them to what the person really worked. The only thing that we don't allow is if somebody checks in and they check out in 5 minutes, and then they want to enter time for like 5 hours, right? Their check-in and check-out time has to be longer than the time that they worked.
Thank you. Well, Lior, I'm going to go ahead and let our tech support folks here take the next question. Desk services, the floor is yours. Hey, Ashley.
Okay, this is the interpreter speaking. Hold on a second. Yeah, she's asking if I can see her clearly. Yes, go ahead. Great. Okay, so as far as accessibility, I know that's important. Somebody had asked that question about following the ADA guidelines and those requirements of, accessibility, and as far as having an interpreter present for this presentation, I really appreciate that. Really grateful for that. I work with several IHSS providers that are deaf and hard of hearing, and some can speak for themselves and some just use sign language. It's just each of those deaf individuals communicate differently. So the question I have is in regards to EVV, and I know with the public authority who deals with the IHSS program, sometimes they don't provide interpreters because they just don't know how to do it and how to request for, an interpreter. So I am wondering if you could provide ASL interpreters when you do this EVV training. So in that way, the deaf, those who are deaf who work for IHSS and need to do this training, we actually have sign language interpreters. I do have another question, but I'll let you answer the first question.
Sure. Yes, we can definitely include sign language interpreters for those trainings. We often do them in different languages, so we'll definitely make sure that we annotate which trainings will have sign language interpreters, so people can definitely have access to them for sure.
Okay, great. Wonderful. And then my next question that I have, it's more of just probably feedback per se, rather than a question. For your frequently asked questions with CDSS, in that department, there's agencies that provide, there's interpreting services, for trainings, but we need to make sure that the CDSS website is also more accessible for those who are blind, and also including the deaf community. So for example, with your website, like there's FEMA, and with the state, they actually provide ASL videos and vlogs and videos that you can see that pertain, so for example, when COVID hit, there were videos and vlogs of announcements of somebody signing what was, actually what is read, it's actually signed in a video. So I know with EVV, there's a change that's going to happen on July 1st. So if it's just a suggestion, if you can have a deaf individual signing what your announcements are online, have a video, and it's a deaf individual and not a hearing interpreter, that the deaf person can equally relay that information via sign language on a video blog that pertains to the information that's being posted, and creating ASL vlogs. Also in regards to the frequently asked questions, having those in sign language as well by a deaf individual.
No, sure. We can definitely take that back, particularly for the CDSS website. I don't have oversight over that, but definitely it's something I think it's a good suggestion, and we'll definitely take that back. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and the next person is Michelle Rousey. You should be able
Hi,
to.
can you hear
Hi.
me? Hi. I wanted to bring up a couple points. As we're all moving to more of a digital tech society, many places in California are have hardly access or many places no access to a landline. And our cell phones should be geo-tracking if we enable them to be. And this is not only for consumers that this would be an issue for, but our providers as you're pushing forward this new EVV. And it really needs to be looked at more because of it's definitely a digital divide between who still has a landline and those who don't. And I want you to be very aware of that, and that it costs more to keep a landline now than having a cell phone. Also, I noticed just this last week with the timesheets online for my provider and me signing them, that there was messaging about the change in live-in providers coming in July. The announcement has already gone on your online portals. If you're not already aware that it's already gone forward, saying that it's being implemented as we go forward right now. And three, I agree with what somebody else's comment about us needing to give pushback. The Cures Act it is something that has interpretation by CMS, and we as a state and consumers of this state of California were told that geo-tracking would not be implemented with IHSS. And now it's going to be, and I have major concerns that we're not pushing enough so that we don't have those penalties. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your feedback.
All right. Well, that takes us to Raven Williams. Raven, you should be able to unmute yourself. The floor is yours.
Hi. I guess my question is just to make sure I understand, because I'm not quite understanding. The way that the providers and the recipients utilize EVV currently, I don't really see the difference right now between them, other than them having to check in, I guess, at the beginning of the shift. I'm not sure how, I don't know how to put this. I'm not sure how the functionality is different if you're going to allow them to complete their timesheet the same way that they're completing it now and check the little field that says, in the community or in the home. I'm not really sure what the difference is right now. Or what, I'm just not sure what the difference is with the new implementation.
Sure. The difference is that right now there's no requirement for a provider to check in and check out at the beginning and ending of their shift, and for the system to capture their location in real time. So that's essentially the change. Right now, providers can go in at the end of the pay period and they enter all of that data in, right? Their start time, end time, location for each day that they work, and the number of hours that they worked. And then they submit their timesheet to the recipient. The new requirement is that if they're a non-live-in provider, they're going to have to check in and check out at the beginning of each shift. So they would check in, identify their location. Based on their location, we would either capture geolocation or not at that point. And then they would submit their timesheet like normal. We have to give providers the ability to change and update their time because people make mistakes all the time. And so we're continuing to keep the system the way it is so that since folks have been using it, so that they can update their time. And really what the change is going to be that they're required to check in and out at the beginning of each shift.
So how is geolocation captured? For example, if I'm a provider and I go to my recipient's home, how do they know that, I checked in at the home or not?
So you check in, you select your recipient, you check in, and you identify where you're at. If you're at the recipient's home, the device captures the location at that moment. We have the recipient's address. So at that point, it's just capturing where that person is when they're checking in and capturing that location. So the device does it.
And this device is either an iPad,
A cell phone.
cell phone, etc. So
Yeah.
I guess I'm assuming then there's functionality, like systematic functionality changes to the ESP on your guys' end that the counties and no one else has to worry about.
That is correct.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
I think that's it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That takes us to Marissa. Marissa, you should be able to unmute yourself.
So yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I should be unmuted. So I have a couple questions. So in other words, I just want to be clear that the web portal can be used or any type of thing that would allow us web access, in addition to a cell phone and an app. And in other words, if a provider forgets or doesn't do it, the system does allow for changes. Because I know on the DDS side, for the regional center side, they do allow changes and it's not a problem. So, but like if somebody forgets numerous days in a row or something like that, there's still the ability to go back and fix it. Basically, I want clarity on that.
Sure. So yes, that is 100% correct. So a provider can always go back and update if they forgot to check in, they forgot to check out. It's very similar to the system that's being used on the EVV phase 2 side. We're allowing changes. There's no penalties to make those changes either.
I also would like to support the comments that were made earlier in regards to non-live-in attendants that work overnight. If an attendant has to wake up at midnight to just check in, check out, that's really annoying, and it's going to be harder for us to get evening attendance. And secondly, I wish you guys would just get it together and have a state solution that works, because similarly with the other comments that have been made, if there's multiple systems that a client and an attendant have, but they have to check in at separate times to do that, that's also really annoying too.
No, thank you so much for your feedback. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
All right, well, that takes us to Debbie Lushler. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Close, it's Wexler. My question is basically, if you start in the community and then go to the home, but you end in the community, how does the system reflect or know at any place that you actually did some of the work in the home?
It doesn't matter. It's really about check in and check out where that, because this doesn't impact the number of hours that somebody's working, right, and getting paid. This really is about checking in and out at the beginning of and ending of each shift, which is the mandate essentially. So if they start in the community, they end in the community, and they identify the number of hours that they work, there's no problem at all.
And so really this whole question about geolocating is they can locate, so to speak, that you're in the client's home because you're calling or entering from that location. Other than that, if you're in the community, the system doesn't know that. Am I getting that right?
That is correct. So when the provider checks in, they identify where they are. So they say, I'm either at the recipient's home or I'm in the community. So if they're at the recipient's home, then we at that point capture the location. If they're out in the community, we do not. And that's based on the federal requirements.
So there isn't any way to actually find out, well, how many hours were you in the home and how many hours were you out in the community? There's no way to really track that at this point.
No, and we're not tracking that.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, the next person stated that they did not have a microphone. I'm going to give them the chance to ask the question out loud. Otherwise,
Hey, Donald, before we go on, is there a slide after this that has contact information?
You betcha. I know we're getting kind of close to that time, and if there are still more questions even after this, the slide is yours. I'll quiet up here.
Yeah, I don't mind going a little bit past 3 because I know we have some folks queued up, but I do want to make sure that folks are aware that you can submit public comment to us. You can do it through the EVV email box here. So you can, this says to be added to the state distribution list or submit EVV related questions. Here's the email box for us. If you have public comments, you can also send it directly to this email box and we will gather them up. You definitely, there's no deadline for public comments. We're going to continue, like Claire said, we're going to continue to interact and talk with you all and get your feedback. We're going to continue to do that all the way up through implementation. So I definitely, if you have public comment, definitely submit it to us through this email box here, evv@dss.ca.gov. We'll definitely leave this up, and then we'll go ahead and go on to the next. And I know we only have interpreters for a limited amount of time, so we'll go just a little bit beyond 3 o'clock if that's okay with folks. I just want to get everybody who has their hand up, I want to get their questions.
Great. And I do want to say that for those websites you just mentioned, we did go ahead and put it in the chat as well. If people want to click on it, copy it, touch it, whatnot, it will be there. So that takes us to Jennifer. I'm going to give you the ability to unmute yourself. If you can't, again, I have your questions ready to go for you, Jennifer, Tahima, that I should know and I don't know. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and read the questions out loud, Leor. There's 2. It's when they clock out, does it ask them the total hours worked? Also, is this system mandatory? What would happen if a provider didn't use EVV and just entered time?
They're required to enter their start time and end time. So if they do not, at this point, there's no penalty, but if this is a requirement of employment to work as in IHSS. So they will have to use electronic timesheets and they will have to use the EVV system. So that's pretty much the requirement. There are no penalties, although for folks who have issues, and the system will still require them to enter their check-in and out times if they did not. So they will not be able to just enter their timed work. They're going to have to identify when they checked in and out for that shift for each day that they work, just as they do today.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, that then takes us to Sherry Williams. Sherry, the floor is yours.
Yes, I just have a few questions to ask. A lot of the clients that I have worked for in the past don't either have Wi-Fi, don't have technology in their home at all, and do not want it in their home. And how are you going to capture this? Our timesheets can't even be issued unless you go out in the community to do it. And 2, they have government phones. A lot of this in and out, check in and out, I don't understand what that's all about myself, because like I say, you do a lot of stuff on your way into the client, especially if they live up in the hills, or even in region 6 where there's no Wi-Fi, etc., or up in other regions here up in the foothills. You're collecting medications, groceries, because there's no access to anything else. And then you get up there and they have no Wi-Fi.
Sure. So your device, so when you check in, you would check in on your own device. And if you didn't have any type of signal, your device actually holds that until you do have a signal. And it would populate that for you, that check-in time and all of that. So it's not necessarily you'd be using the recipient's device, you would continue to use your device and to check in and out. So that's the way that that would work.
Great, thank you. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and Jade, we go ahead and unmute yourself. The floor is yours.
Hi. So I'd like to reiterate a question that I feel like has been asked multiple times and avoided throughout this meeting. Considering the legislation, the CARES Act doesn't actually mention geolocation and geotracking. Can you please be specific about CMS's interpretation and the conversations that were had?
Sure.
Hi, thanks, Jade. This is Claire again. We can send out with the other materials the policy interpretation from CMS, the question and answer that they published, basically providing both their interpretation of this rule as well as their interpretation of the live-in providers being exempted. They were together in the same question and answer. And hopefully that will help give you a frame for the way they're viewing the program and their interpretation of what it means to electronically verify this information. Sorry, Leora, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead if you want to.
No, you're fine. I was actually going to say the same thing. And I believe we have posted some of this out on the website, but we can also link to it on the federal side as well. They have a lot of like their interpretations, lots of PowerPoints out there that go over this information. So we can definitely share that.
Okay.
Great, well, thank you. Yeah, that'll be helpful. So that takes us to the ASL interpreters. You're still here. Thank you. We are at Connie Arnold's next. Thank you for being here. You should be able to unmute yourself. Connie, floor is yours.
I had a, can you hear me?
You bet.
Okay, I had a question regarding if somebody is homeless or is not in their home, they're having to stay somewhere else. How are you going to track their time when the provider comes to help them?
So I believe the policy is in general that people have an address, right? And if they have an address in the system and the provider goes to the home, they check in the home, it captures that location at that point. If they're not in the home, it doesn't capture location. If they're in the community, we're not really using this for any type of tracking or geolocation of the recipient, those kinds of things. We're not doing that. We're just simply capturing the location where that device is. And if they say they're in the home, we capture the location, and that's pretty much all that happens.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jeanette Brownlee, you should be able to unmute yourself. The floor is yours. Jeanette, I saw you unmute yourself. The microphone was ready, but we couldn't hear you. There you go again. You there? Well, if you'd like, you can go ahead and send me a message. I'll read it out to the group. More happy to. No, we cannot, Jeanette. I'm sorry, unless I cannot. I'm not sure if you can, Leora. I have come across that before. But yeah, just a reminder to all while we get to the next person ready to go that we will be posting our slides, the transcript of today's webinar, as well as a copy of the recording on our site within the next few weeks after things are made accessible and updated and whatnot. Cleaned up a little bit.
All right.
So Jeanette's question was about recipients who live in two places. I have a college dorm. I spend most of my time in which would be quote unquote community, will there be any risk for having providers listing community all the time?
No. They should just be putting where they're at. And if they're in the community and that's where they start in their shift, that's where they start in their shifts.
Oh no, someone else's question. Sorry, thank you. Sorry, Jeanette. But Jeanette will be joining another time. Thank you. All right. Well, that takes us to Christine. Christine iPhone, the floor is yours.
Hi. So you just read my question.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I did have a follow up. So I have a live-in provider in my dorm, but my dorm is the community, not my residential permanent address.
So that would be if they live with you in your dorm, they live in your home. So they
Okay, but my
not required to
registered
use-
home is a permanent address in another county.
And that's okay, but your home is where you are, right? So if they live with you, we would consider them a live-in provider and they would not have to do EVV.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
And I also support a legal challenge to the CMS interpretation and a legal challenge to the 20th Century Cures Act. Thank you.
Sure, thank you for your feedback. So I think we have one more, Daniel.
That is it. Daniel Aldretti, the floor is yours. The last hand up. Please ask away.
Hi, thank you. Sorry for keeping you a little bit past your time. Just one more clarification regarding the penalties for EVV. My understanding is the penalties will be relating only to the check-ins and sort of the modification to any timesheets that would happen at a later time after check-ins occur. As far as hours, it would not relate to violations relating to the time that they claim.
So if you're talking about violations or penalties for providers, there are no penalties or violations for providers for making errors or forgetting to check in or out. There's nothing like that.
Okay, and they wouldn't be any change to violations to what they claim if there are errors in their check-ins.
That's correct. So, it will work the same way as it does now. All of the violations are triggered based on the time that somebody worked, that they identify that they work. So if they go over the overtime limits based on the hours that they work, those violations are still in play, but they would not get any type of violation for not doing EVB or making a mistake.
Okay.
All right, I think Jade popped up one more time. So let's go ahead and take her question and then we'll have to close out the meeting. Go ahead, Jade.
So my question is, in the event that somewhere down the line, IHSS or the powers be decide to enact penalties for errors, will that be communicated in a stakeholder meeting, or will that be something that pops up suddenly? Like, what will that?
No, great question. Yeah, no. Right now, state law says that we cannot penalize providers for EVV. So in order to make a change, and we have no intention of doing that, in order to make a change, it would require a change in state law. And that would obviously, we would never do a change in state law without talking to people and communicating and all of that. So it would be a very long process for anything like that to happen. And there's no intention for that to happen. So I just want to make sure I made that very clear.
All right. Well, I went ahead and gave Jeanette Brownlee one more. There we go. Hi.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Okay, the questions that I have are purely technical. One of the questions that I have is, what are you going to do about recipients that are using a VPN? It's 2022. These are considerations that a VPN is a virtual network protocol that allows you to be able to appear in one place other than the other. People use these for multiple reasons, including being able to order on Amazon for whatever apparent reason they have where you can't order things, to be able to view foreign film, and other forms of entertainment. So I'd like to know how, if a VPN is enacted, if they have a VPN on their computer in the recipient's home, how that will be handled. And the second question that I have, what should we do when geolocation tracking fails? Because as we've seen with the EVV website, there has been many technical glitches that have created some issues that could be resolved in a timely manner and some that could not. So what would be, what if we ended up in a scenario where I had this app on my phone, the app failed to turn off the GPS location, and what would be my options for litigation? Hello? Are you there?
Yes.
Okay, I was having a problem with my microphone before. I wasn't sure if you heard me. I'm sorry.
So I was just a little, so with regards to like geolocation failing, what do you mean? It doesn't capture your location?
No, that it does not turn off after the location is captured. And is so this would be strictly geolocation, not GPS. Is there going to be a difference? Is this the type of GPS tracking that websites use when you go into shop and they just record what your zip code is and they actually see you by that, and then when you leave the site it automatically turns off? Because my question is a technical one. How will the GPS turn on and off, and how can we be guaranteed that our privacy is going to be protected by using your app?
So your location on your device is managed by your device and you. So you would turn your location on, and the system only captures that location when you click the check-in button. That's it. And only if you're in the recipient's home. If you're in the community, it does not do that. You can turn it off and on as you see.
Okay, I understand that. But what I'm saying is if the system goes into error, not if it's working correctly, if it goes into error, how would we be able to fix that? Because with the GPS location, if for some reason that doesn't work in your app or on the site, because sometimes this isn't a perfect world, sometimes things fail on the EVV website itself, and we have to report it to the technical department. What would we do in this specific case should that geo tracking location fail?
So if it fails, the system does not allow it to continue to track. So, and you monitor, you have all of that capability on your own device. So the only time it would fail is to not capture the location if you were in the recipient's home. And at that point, the system would just capture that the geolocation failed back in the back end of the system. So that
okay.
we're not tracking things.
Okay. So if it fails, then should we call in and let you know that it failed?
You would not have to do that. No. So the requirement is if for some reason the capturing the location fails, there's an error code that goes over that just is registered by the system. There's no tracking. There's no place for any data to go. It literally captures that information at check-in and out. There's only one place for it to capture that. And if it does not capture that, then it throws an error code, and there's no harm to the provider at all. They wouldn't even know that happened.
Great. Well, I do want to remind you, Leora, that our interpreters will be leaving here. I do want to make sure that there's nothing else that we need to touch upon. I know we're getting close to that time, including giving everyone the ability to download the transcript or anything they might need to do. I want to make sure to give everyone plenty of time and that information is shared and through all the groups and whatnot.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much, Donald. So that was, I think, essentially the last question. I know if there are other questions, please feel free to submit them through the EVV box. We will be updating frequently asked questions based on this meeting and any communications we receive so that we can provide those questions and answers out there publicly. Thanks again for joining us, and I hope everybody has a great rest of the evening. And stay safe. I don't know if all of you are in a place where it's storming, but it's really going to storm here. So please stay safe. So for those folks who want to download the transcript, here's your chance. Thank you to our interpreters and all of our attendees. And we will see you.